Hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint Live. Really excited to be back with you. Here we find ourselves already in 2023 and excited about the amazing lineup of people that we have that'll be coming and joining us this year to talk to you about all sorts of issues. Of course, if you're not familiar with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, we started a little over 4 years ago. The focus of the organization began around the use of restraint seclusion, really expanded into restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, all the things that were often being done to kids, very often in the name of behavior. What we've, of course, found is that a lot of kids with disabilities, Black and brown children, kids with a trauma history, are being subjected to a lot of disproportionate discipline that has been leading kids down a school to prison pipeline. And we're trying to do something to change that, to lead to better outcomes for kids, for families, and for others. So our vision is really about safer schools for students, teachers, and staff, but hopefully it's part of a better world as well. Very excited today, as always. Any of you that join us on a regular basis know that every 2 weeks when we do these, it's really exciting for you. It's really exciting for me because we have amazing people that join us, share their expertise, share their journey as well. And today is no exception. Today I have Stacy G, York Nation, joining us for a very special presentation. Stacy is a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of GoBeYou. Today's session, as always, is being recorded. So all of our sessions are always recorded. They're available after the fact on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen as an audio podcast. So you can go to Spotify or iTunes and download these to listen to as well. So with that all said, let me go ahead and bring up our special guest for the day and introduce you to Stacy. Stacy, it's good to have you here today. I'm going to give a little bit of background. Hey, good to see you. Stacy, you've worked with families for over 20 years. Your passion is working with what you call the tough humans, including adopted families and veterans with intensive training in trauma-informed practices. You excel at providing real-life applicable strategies to parents, caregivers, educators, mental health professionals. Of course, like many of us, you wear multiple hats: international speaker, published author, clinician, service member, mother, sister, daughter, friend, co-parent with an ex-husband. And the most important hat that you wear is human. And I love that. And I love the title of your presentation today. Often I think a lot about that, about the importance of being a good human, right? Of course, you've earned your bachelor's degree in science and psychology education and a master's degree in social work. Became a licensed clinical social worker in 2003. You're also a behavioral health officer in Wyoming Army National Guard and live in the mountains of Colorado with your partner, 2 teenagers, and 2 puppers. And I have to ask you, because we're big dog people here. I've got 3, although they don't join me for the presentations because sometimes it's actually that time of the day that Amazon, UPS, and FedEx show up. And if I leave the door open, they will come in and let me know when our packages arrive. But what kind of dogs do you have?
I have a 140-pound chocolate lab named Odin Michael. He needed a middle name because he was just a little naughty. And I have an 80-pound little black lab named Titan George. And they're here with me. So sometimes the barking happens.
And they're welcome to. Yeah. And if they jump up, I mean, the great thing about dogs is, unlike cats, cats will get up and you know what they're going to show you in the camera. Dogs don't think that same way. So that's never a concern. We had a chocolate lab for a number of years. And unfortunately, we lost her somewhat prematurely due to Lyme's disease, which is really a problem in dogs, but particularly labs and in this area, which was heartbreaking. But we have 3 now, 2 rescues and a mixed breed. So big dog people. But anyway, we are not here to talk about dogs. We are here. I had the opportunity to meet you in person when we were in Tennessee. Yes. And I remember sitting across the table from you and, just having conversation with you about a lot of things. One of the things that stuck out in my mind was someplace amazing. You mentioned to get donuts, but what really stuck out in my mind was kind of the work that you're doing. And of course, it's always such a pleasure to meet people in this journey that are doing trauma-informed and brain-aligned work to make a difference. And, you left an impression with me and just wanted to invite you and have you join us. And you've agreed to do a presentation today, which is really exciting. So again, just a huge welcome. I do want to let you know, and I mentioned this as we were getting ready, we have people that join us from all over the world. Yeah. And I'm going to ask our viewers, in fact, Linda, thank you. Linda always helps me here because I often get on and say, we have viewers from all over the world. We have people from New Zealand and Australia. Well, Linda happens to be from New Zealand, and usually when I mention New Zealand on cue, she kind of pops up there. So it's great to see Linda there. But we have people that do join us from all over the world. And if you are watching right now live, tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. It's always interesting to kind of see who we're talking to. Jennifer has also joined us from Davis, California. But if you haven't weighed in yet, tell us in the chat who you are and where you're from. So I'm going to bring your slides up here and have you kind of take it away. And we had talked about, I'll stick around during your presentation. And we had talked about, potentially taking questions during your presentation. So
Please.
if people, and I know you said, hey, let's have a conversation. So I want to invite the audience, let's have a conversation as Stacy's going through this. If you have questions, you have thoughts, feel free to put those in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that and trying to bring those things up as we go. And, I might also throw some questions at you. I'll try not to throw in so many questions that we can't get through the 5 tips. Who knows? Maybe we'll even get a bonus tip or 2. But we'll kind of go from there. So a couple more introductions before we get started. Mickey Marinelli from Austin, Texas. We have Divina from Connecticut. Suzanne from Maryland, also here in Maryland. So a couple of other people joining us. So with that, a huge welcome, Stacy. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I loved the evening we had together with our colleagues in Tennessee, and you too left an impression on me. And there's a reason why. And so I'm going to lead into that. So I have been so thankful in my journey to have found the work that I did pretty early on as a clinician. And I started my job and my life in this work in school-based mental health. And we were restraining a kid for 6 to 8 hours a day as adults. And that didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. It wasn't right. It didn't align. I was in my early 20s. This was a first job in the field. I was like, is this how it's done? I had the opportunity to attend a training by Dr. Bruce Perry, and I was just going for continuing ed credits. And it changed my whole life. It changed the direction I've gone in my practice. It changed who I am as a human. It changed how I parent. And it really has given me the tools to really prevent exactly what your organization is all about. And so I landed in this whole entire job and field and information because I was restraining kids. And I want to be really honest about that. I know better now. And when we know better, we do better. And when you invited me to chat about this, I thought, ooh, what a cross section of my past and how far we've come and how much further we still need to go. And so I just want to own that there's lots of people who listen to this who've been in those positions, and we have new information. We have better information. And so I shared with you earlier, I could talk for hours, but I picked 5 tips that I think really do apply in all the settings I work in. And so when I say I wear multiple hats, I do a lot of professional training for educators. I do a lot of trauma-informed practices, helping get schools to get on board with social emotional learning and de-escalation, understanding the brain, those kind of things. I do a ton of research or a ton of support and education for parents, caregivers, foster adopt. Recently, I have a best friend who just adopted a baby, and I got online real fast. I was like, these are the things you need to know right now that are going to help that brain development. She was like, I didn't even know you worked with adoptive families. I'm like, I know. All the things I share in this presentation today, I've also taught my soldiers. And I also have applied this in my own life. So I want to be really clear. The things I have learned are usually because of the failures I have made. And that is the human part of all of this, super messy human stuff. So with that being said, I'm so excited that you're here. I see some friends on board and I see some of our people. If you have an opportunity to type in the chat box your role, I also think that's helpful. Are you an educator? Are you a parent? Are you a partner? Are you a step parent? all those roles, it brings us together, because I think when we do these, it's so critical to realize we're not alone. And we're not alone when we might feel like we're on these islands being alone. Some of you are working in environments where you're like, seclusion and restraint don't work anymore. And your teams are going, well, what are we going to do instead? And that makes you a pioneer with this information. And so we're going to dig right in, guys. Thanks for this opportunity. The first tip that I think all humans should understand is that we have a stress response system. I know it sounds obvious, but how many of you, when you're bringing your children home from the hospital, they were so intent on making sure that the car seat was attached in the right way, not one person talked to you about brain development? And that is like mind-blowing to me. So we want to look at our stress response systems. When I talk to people about this, I let people know our stress response systems are like rubber bands. The more we're stressed, the more we stretch. And when we do something that releases stress, we release the stretch. Some of us are living in stressed out states, and that is a big pickle. And so when we're living in stressed out states, what happens is any bit of pressure that we put on, whether it's a school environment, whether it's, hey, I need you to push in that chair, I need you to empty the dishwasher, I need you to go to school. When we're stressed, we can stretch and snap in big ways. And so we're starting to understand that snapping that we see as far as behavior in some kids is about how stressed is their stress response system. And so everyone has one, right? How many of you wake up and you're like, yeah, I'm going to rock the day. And then something happens. You get a flat tire, you hit traffic, you get a call that somebody you know and love passed away. Then we're stretched. What happens is that stress response system, the more we get in tune with it, the more we understand it, the more we really understand what releases our stress and what helps us with that, the better we are at being human and the better we are at interacting with humans. Now, here's a key tip. I didn't tell you this, guy, but I'm going to give you 5 tips, and under each tip, there's going to be like little other tips. So I hope that's okay. So a key tip is that kids have to have adults co-regulate their stress response system. We can't just expect kids to act the right way, to behave, to just do what they mean to do, right? We have to recognize that co-regulation, which I'm going to talk about, is a developmental milestone. We have to accept that stress, right? That stress response. When someone offers us their calmness, that's an example of co-regulation. We as adults are what we call emotional crisis responders, right? How have you been in a car accident? When you got in a car accident, the paramedics showed up. Did the paramedics say, what the hell are you doing? You've ruined my life. No, we would kill them. We would kill them. We really would. We would have these really terrible responses. What they've done is they've been trained to emotionally respond to us in a state of crisis. And so we as adults have to recognize that when a kid has really big feelings, really strong reactions, really big behaviors, it is a sign that they're stressed, and we have to offer our response and our regulation to them. We can't just expect them to automatically figure it out. Here's the thing. We want to teach kids to self-regulate. No one can self-regulate until you've been co-regulated. Co-regulation is a huge developmental task, and I think we're missing a lot of that in our teaching about child development, right? The other thing I say is, how many of you during the pandemic were losing your mind? You were like stressed out, you're home, everything's been shut down. How many of you called a friend, called a parent, called, somebody that you love to support you? That is an example of co-regulation. We actually seek co-regulation pretty regularly when we're walking through this whole human experience that we're having. Okay. What I'll say is there's a slippery slope between co-regulation and codependency. Codependency is like, oh, That person has a feeling, and I'm going to need to walk on eggshells around that feeling, or I'm going to have to match that feeling so that I get love, I get acceptance, we're all okay. We don't want that. What we want to recognize is that each individual can have these feelings and these emotional expressions individually in the same home, in the same classroom. We can all have and be in a different state of stress at one time. We don't actually want to become part of the emotional crisis. And so we really want to show up and offer co-regulation. Whew.
Stacey, I love the point you made. You see, and I jumped in just so you could get a drink here, but
I
I love the
appreciate
point
that.
you made early on about, like, bringing home a baby. You've studied how to do the car seat. You've read lots of information on parenting, but there's a huge piece of it that's missing, right? And I used to remember joking around with people like, you need a manual, right? You need a manual for parenting. And kind of in the vein of all that you're talking about here, um, I'm happy to say that there's something that's gotten closer to a manual recently than I think ever before, and that's a Mona Hook's new book, Brain and
Yes.
Body Parenting, and I
Yes.
fantastic book, and really kind of gets into understanding the nervous system. Probably behind me here, I'll grab it in a second, but really fantastic book that gets into this. But you're right, it's such a missing piece. And one of the things that we're always talking about here at the Alliance is, like, how do we go upstream? How do we go upstream so that we're not getting into crisis
Yep.
situations that require or lead to, and require was the wrong word there, but lead to restraint, seclusion, all of these negative consequences. And what can we do upstream to help prevent it? And there's so much that goes back to the childhood gaps, and even these basic understandings of the fact that we all have this nervous system. And how does that, when you're a new parent, how does the screaming baby affect our nervous system, and
Yeah.
all of that? So I love that point you made, and I think it's a place where we continue to need to go upstream. Is how do we get some of this messaging to parents and families?
Yeah, and I think we have to start looking at our own regulation system. We have to, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we get into it, but we have to look at what are our triggers, what is our stress response system, what calms us down, what does this look like? And when we start to normalize stress and stress response, and we start to teach it and live it, it becomes part of a natural conversation. I'm going to give you two examples. I was so thankful I found Dr. Perry's work and the understanding of the brain before I had my own children. And so I was able to really put a lot of these things in place as I've been navigating parenting. Now, keep in mind, I did not grow up that way. I grew up in a stressed out home, right? And so many fears as a parent. I was like, I don't want my parents to fall out of my mouth. I don't want to say this. I don't want to do that. But we know that when we're stressed, we do what we were wired to do, unless we've dug deep into what it is we need to unwire and relearn. And so one day I'm having a really bad day in the kitchen. I'm a single mom, newly divorced. I'm crying my eyeballs out. And my daughter walks in and she's like, Mom, you're pretty dysregulated. What do we need to do to support you? You got to get your shit together. We got to get to school. And I'm like, you nailed it, sister. This is what I need. She offered me co-regulation. Now, do I think that kids should parent parents? No, I don't. But I do think humans can co-regulate. And I think we have all sorts of little creatures that are these kids and students who know how to co-regulate really, really well and are going to offer that up.
Yeah, I'll never forget my son. We were big proponents of approaches like Ross Green's collaborative proactive
Sure.
solutions. And I remember my son would begin to, "Hey, Dad, I see you're having a difficult time with blank. What's up?" But at the same time, I mean, I've worked with done a lot of work with Dr. Lori Desautel's, and one point had the opportunity to talk to students, and we're talking about third, fourth, fifth grade students that had been working with an educator who had been using a lot of kind of brain aligned and stress response system and all of that. And these young people understood their nervous system far better than most adults I've ever met. And they actually were taking some of this knowledge home with them. And that's not a bad thing. So, I mean, it's really a positive thing. I think when we begin to understand these things, we begin to apply these principles to our, and I think you're really fortunate. Gosh, I wish I discovered Bruce Perry's work before I became a parent. A lot of this work that, it's funny, a lot of this work that, I've discovered, um, I was not aware of early on, and I wish I was. I mean, I wish I had Mona's book 17 years ago, 18 years ago now.
Sure.
But at the same time, what I do know is that I learned things in my journey that were really critical
Yeah.
and now align with the things that I've learned and the brain science that supports them. I mean, for instance, not only co-regulation, but the fact that our own emotional state is a contagion. And, I'll never forget, when I learned with my son how important my emotions, my feelings, my tone of voice, my
Mhm.
facial expression, all of that was, there was a point early on where I really kind of hit me that the approach I needed to take was a step backwards, a really calm and soothing voice, and all of those things. And my wife used to tease me like, "Well, I don't understand why he responds so well to you." I was responding differently to him.
Yep.
And of course, I later come to learn all of this through some of the approaches, but it's hard. And like you said, I mean, I was raised in a similar way. In fact, I even went to some private religious schools where I was spanked and
Yep.
had lots of things happen. But I'm a firm believer in your opening statement that when we know better, we do better. And yeah, it's amazing. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Oh, I love
what
it.
you're saying just hits me right here.
Well, and I just to build on what you're saying, I teach people to understand their own heart rate, right? Like the basics of our nervous system, because the calmest heart rate in the room can calm all other heart rates. And if we're engaging, here's the thing about love and attachment. When we love and attach to our own children, to our students, to other kids, like we do this work and we're in these fields, we choose to be parents because we want to love kids. When that love is activated in an emotional, like distressing way, our heart rate's going to spike or it's going to decrease. And so we want to look at what is our heart rate and teach our own kids like, whoa, you're looking a little stressed out. What's your heart rate? And so for a period of time, we had a rule in our house that we didn't actually come back together and talk about things until everyone's heart rate was more relaxed. We'd take a pause. We all have Fitbits. We're checking our heart rate. And my kids are 8, 9, 10 when we're doing that. And that is such a critical piece of them learning their own stress response, but me really sinking into how was I wired? What am I bringing into this relationship as a parent? And what do I want to do differently? I got to know my stress response system.
Absolutely.
Love that. Okay. Are we ready for tip number 2?
Let's go.
Let's do it. All right. Tip number 2, utilize your sensory system. This is like a game changer for me. So for those of you who know Dr. Perry's work, this is his brain model. I think lots of people in the field are very much using a similar model. And what we know is the bottom part of your brain, that brainstem, that pink box, that it's fully developed by 9 months old. It houses your fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, and your sensory system. The next part of the brain to develop is your emotional regulation system. The next part of your brain to develop is your limbic system. And the last part of your brain to develop is your cortex. Your cortex is responsible for critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, reflection, introspection, and it doesn't fully develop till you're 25 or 30. When I train adults, the people on this, what I say is your cortex is your worst enemy. And it's your worst enemy because you have one and they don't. Your kids don't have a cortex. They don't have a cortex that's fully developed. You can have a kid in your home who's bright, straight A student. Their critical thinking is on point, fully developed. You get an emotion on board with a teacher, a parent, a foster parent. That critical thinking is offline. And adults have to learn how to understand that. So when we talk about emotional regulation, we can do bottom-up regulation. So the bottom of the brain you can engage with to the top, or you can do top-down. Adults love top-down regulation. Tell me how you feel. Let's talk about how your behavior impacted the classroom. We love to process that. Guess what? It doesn't work as effectively as we want. So when I say utilize your sensory system, I mean, that is a skill. We can hijack that fight, flight, freeze in a way that nobody else really understands, right? We understand polyvagal theory now. We understand nervous system stuff. Your sensory system is king. So I'm a fan of bottom up regulation. So in my daughter's IEP, we have mints written into her IEP. She can eat minty, spicy, or sour anytime she's stressed, because guess what? Your brain has to decide, am I going to keep being stressed, or am I going to process this taste that's all of a sudden apart? Taste wins every time. Movement, hugely important, right? I always say when you're a child of the 70s and 80s, you were moving your body and you're highly dehydrated. We barely got a drink of water in the morning and barely got a drink in the afternoon at school. I live in the mountains of Colorado. My kids are going through water bottles at school all day long, right? We need hydration. We need basic needs met. Are we getting enough food? Are we getting enough sleep? Are we getting enough water? What is the sensory system that's happening? Every single person on this call today, watching this live YouTube video, Facebook, wherever you're watching it, you're engaged in some sort of sensory experience. You're looking at my lighting and saying, that lighting's terrible. You're looking at my slides and saying, Stacy needs a graphic designer. You're listening to Guy's voice and you're like, that's so soothing. Somebody is having sensory, every one of you. You're feeling cold in the area that you're in. You're hearing people outside. You're engaging in tapping or doodling or some sort of pattern repetitive behavior. Your sensory system wins every time. So the more you are tuned into your sensory system, the better you are at managing your own stress response. The more you understand your child's sensory system or your student's sensory system, the more you can regulate them. I recently took my kids to Vegas over Thanksgiving to watch Aerosmith. So good. So good. My son says to me, Mom, how in the world do you think it's a good idea to take your sensory system kid to Vegas? How do you think we're going to regulate that? My son's 14. My daughter's 15. I said, bro, I got this figured out. We've built in regulation time. We've built in lots of downtime. We're taking earplugs. We're taking visors. We're taking mints. We've got all these things in place so that my kid, who's activated by all the sensory system things, doesn't escalate. Now, if I had not built all that in, she would have lost her business and the whole trip would have been a bummer, right? The more you understand your own sensory system, the better you are. The more you understand the children in your life, the better you are. Sensory system first. When I started going to the Army, I had to sleep in all these weird places and I did not have heavy blankets. It doesn't matter what time of year, I need weights to sleep. So I started packing my blankie. And people are like, you're in the Army. What are you doing? I'm like, I got to sleep. Sleep wins. But I know my sensory system. I don't have weight. I'm not sleeping. Guess what? The weight helped. We have to make sure that we do top up or bottom up. The other thing that's really cool is when you start to do with this kids, they learn about their own sensory system. They learn like, oh, when I'm in loud areas, I get really triggered. How can I process this? Oh, I have to go to a school assembly. What can I do to be successful there? Because those loud noises really activate me. If you're a teacher, my favorite thing to do with the hardest kid in your class is to do a sensory inventory. So you invite your kids into the class, like in your classroom, you say, hey kids, I want to know what you notice in this classroom. What kind of go through your senses? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you hear? What do you feel? You're going to have a kid tell you, I hear the projector all day long. I'm so distracted by that. You're going to have a kid tell you, I hear so-and-so 3 doors down and their voice is so loud. All I can hear is what they're teaching. You're going to have a kid tell you what rooms are cold, what rooms are loud, whose voice is the most annoying, that you have coffee breath. Like the more you learn about sensory systems and you invite and get curious about kids and their sensory system, the more you can help manage regulation. Okay, I'll pause so I can take a drink. Thoughts about that?
And that's a good point to pause. And first of all, great choice on Aerosmith. I'm sure that was a great show. My son, who sensory issues are certainly, as you were talking about that, I remember in first grade, it was like the air conditioning unit down the hall. I mean, nobody else would be tuned into that, but he'd hear that. And in a related note, his first concert was AC/DC, and he had a blast. But we had we'd taken some precautions, and he had a great time. But
Mhm.
there's so much that I mean, some of it's about kind of a felt sense of safety as well, and kind of having their feelings validated. I want to pause here. Just a couple of things that I see here in the chat.
Yeah.
Uh, One is we've got something from looking at life through a different lens. Thanks for bringing awareness to this. Co-regulation, empathy, validation, and respect helped our autistic son get out of crisis. We unschooled as well. All of these things did wonders for our family. Jennifer said, we have become a cognitive society, and yet it doesn't serve us well, especially our kids.
Yeah.
They don't have the full capacity yet. And it's such a great point. We often look at kids as if they're miniature adults and, have the same,
Yep.
fully developed prefrontal cortex. I was looking at something on a message, kind of a Facebook message group today, and it was a, educator talking about a young autistic student, and they were kind of talking about the fact that well, this kid was intentionally having meltdowns, was their feeling, to get what they wanted. So we often kind of ascribe this idea that like there's this complex thought process that kids are probably even capable of doing,
Right.
but these young children, often young children with disabilities, are somehow not capable of doing certain things, but are very capable of coming up with these really elaborate manipulation schemes, and it just amazes me. But I think some of that is a lack of awareness about kind of the brain science behind it all.
Yeah.
Mickey had something here. What do you do when kids resist to do these bottom-up activities? These bottom-up regulations do work, and and kid acknowledges they do, but will resist doing them. One has to be extremely creative to do them without them noticing, but that's hard to do consistently. The only regulation kid wants to do is electronics to soothe.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
All sorts of thoughts, as you can imagine.
Okay.
Great question. And it's a question I get often. So I want you to remember that co-regulation is a huge part of bottom-up regulation. So we never ask kids to do anything that we're not willing to do ourselves. And so oftentimes what we learn from kids who are dysregulated is that all the kids are a little bit dysregulated. This kid just happens to have some behaviors that might be escalated more than everyone else. So starting to do regulation activities as a group is always a great plan. When we see adults doing regulation activities, it also gives kids permission to do regulation activities. So I had a dad that really got this. And anytime he was getting ready to engage with his dysregulated son, he just started doing a yoga pose. And the kid would be like, "What are you doing?" And he'd be like, "Feel free to join me. We'll talk about what I'm doing." And he would engage the son by doing the yoga pose. And then the kid would match the yoga pose. And then pretty soon they're in a regulating pose and they're talking through the hard thing. I had another mom. Anytime her kid was dysregulated, she'd just walk right out to a trampoline in their backyard and she'd just start bouncing. Because here's the cool thing about dysregulated kids. They're going to follow you wherever you go to tell you exactly how dysregulated they are and what they need. And she was like, "Come on up, tell me everything you need." And then pretty soon they're engaging in some sort of pattern repetitive activity that's regulating them. In a school setting, I have schools that have put these regulating activities outside of classroom doors. And they do them inside the classroom. They practice. And then what do we do with dysregulated kids? We send them to the hallway. And what do dysregulated kids do in a hallway? They dysregulate everyone in the hallway. And so we want to give them activities that show them. I have also learned that when you teach a kid about heart rate, use an oximeter, and you teach kids how to calm their heart rate through regulating activities, they love having that control. And so here's the thing about, refusing, defiance, all those kind of things is about control. When I don't feel good on the inside, I don't have control on the inside, I'm going to control everything on the outside. When you, adult with a cortex, teach me how to control my insides and show me through heart rate, through various things that I can control that, I'm going to have much more buy-in because now I'm controlling and I'm learning about how to controlling me. So there's various ways to do this. Sometimes you got to build up to it. So I think that electronics is a whole nother session in and of itself. I think we're growing up in a time where we have to figure out how to help kids manage that. I think they use them to soothe. I think they get lots of dopamine hits. I think that the electronics are such a sensory thing that we can't even compete with. So we have to also build on connection, relationship, and co-regulation in order to do that bottom-up regulation.
So I know we're not, through our presentation here today, but as you said, that could be a whole nother session. I'm thinking about the fall, Stacy. Maybe we could do something. I mean, that's something we hear a lot, and even some of the work out there that I think is really good doesn't always do a good job addressing some of these issues. And as you were talking, Jennifer Avenat had jumped on as well and saying, it's an indication kids looking for dopamine, and kind of said some of the same things that you said. So maybe we can talk later about doing something else, kind of really focused on this, because certainly in our modern world, the electronics, the phones. It makes it really tough for a parent who is, trying really hard to help their child.
Here's just a quick little tip I want to tell you. My kids
Sure.
did the 8th grade Washington, D.C. trip last year, and their school was not allowed. The kids were not allowed to take phones on this trip. And it was pretty remarkable how much I had a hard time not being able to get a hold of them, not knowing what was going on. And it gave me pause to go, whew. When they got home, I said, what was it like for you to be in Washington, D.C., away from your parents for 4 days without your phone? Both of them were like, it was one of the best trips of our life. We had so much connection time with our friends. And they said, we're the only 8th grade group there that didn't have phones. They loved it. They said, Mom, we've committed to making sure that at least once a week we're having a whole day without phones, at least like building in these things. But their cortex is more fully developed than younger kids, to be clear.
Sure.
But I was also really appreciated. I said, did everyone feel that way? He said, my kids both said, probably 95% of the kids didn't realize how much that addiction to the phone was getting in the way of their own connections and relationships.
Yeah. And as well for us
cool.
as adults with fully developed prefrontal cortex, I remember going on a trip one time and we were in a cabin and there was no Wi-Fi, which seemed at first like, what? No Wi-Fi. It was wonderful. It was wonderful not to be tethered to, our devices all day long. So definitely benefits for everybody involved. I just wanted to bring up, Michelle said that she was tuning in with her kiddo, who she had to pick up from school today for a second time this week due to a meltdown. Michelle, it's good to have you join us, and hopefully you'll get some ideas out of today that may help. All right, Stacey, let me let you keep going on because I know we've got a.
I know. I know. All right. Tip 3. All right. So for the last year, I've been talking all to parents and educators about self-care. And one of the things I realized in these conversations was we're not looking at our own triggers. We're always talking about what triggers kids. And we're always talking about what is it they need? What is it that triggers them? What's going on with them? This is all about us. And so I want you to just take these 5 questions. I want you to think about them. When we get triggered, these are 5 such important questions to really ask ourselves. And when I say triggered, I mean like you're stretched to the point that you're not making decisions in the way that you want to be making them, right? You're engaging in a way that you don't like. Most of us can kind of be a little bit agitated and we can work through that. But sometimes we get triggered and we lose our business and things fall out of our mouth that we didn't mean, or we engage in our relationships in ways that we don't mean to. These are the 5 questions I want you to ask. Number 1, are your basic needs met? Have you eaten? Have you drank? Are you tired, right? Like we know that when we wake up and we're tired, we're not our best selves. We also know that hangry is real, right? So we always say 95% of all problems can be solved when you eat, when you have something to eat. Keeping in mind, if you're living with a kiddo who has a pretty activated stress response system and their heart rate might be up there, and when I say up there, I mean like resting heart rate over 80 beats per minute, they're burning more calories. They need more fuel in their fuel tank. If you're living in a stressed out state, you also need more fuel in your fuel tank. Basic needs is huge. I read a study the other day that had this astronomical amount of how often, like how much we're all dehydrated. And that is really important to listen to, right? So we're talking about health, but sometimes we don't talk about basic needs. Are our basic needs met? That's clear. Okay. Question number 2, is my kid's sensory system triggering my sensory system? This is so important, right? Especially for you parents who just have kids that are on you all day long, right? When you get touched out, you get triggered. When kids are just touching you all the time, you get triggered. I always tell, I could speak to a room of 1,000 people. 1,000 people could be moving, they could be walking, but one of them taps a pencil and I'm like, where was I? What was I thinking? What are we doing? Oh my gosh, like I get triggered. So you want to know, is your kid's sensory system triggering your sensory system? Important question. Question number 3. Now this gets tricky, okay? This is my therapy brain. And this is like, someone asked me how many thousands of hours I've spent doing clinical work. 20,000 at least. So 20,000 conversations one-on-one with humans. This is so important. Who does my kid remind me from my own past? So I want you to remember that memory is in a filing cabinet. And sometimes when we're triggered, that means a file is out there wandering around. And it might be out there floating around because this kid reminds you of a teacher you had in your past, a person who perpetrated you, somebody who did harm in some way and caused you to have a feeling, perhaps. So when I was going through my divorce, my son said something that my ex-husband used to say to me, and I just had to like walk away. He didn't say it in a bad way. It just was words that fell out of his mouth. And I was like, he's like, Mom, where are you going? I'm like, I just need a minute. I just need a minute. Like, I don't want to engage in the same sort of responses that I used to engage in. I want to be aware of what this looks like. The next part of that question is, when did I feel this feeling before? I often give this example that when we go to a funeral or a wake or a celebration of life, many of us have the experience that we're sitting there and we are thinking of all the times we've ever lost someone, all the death or all the grief we've ever felt. What happens is you've opened up that filing cabinet of grief. And so in that filing cabinet, that feeling can often trigger us. So when you are with kids and you have a feeling, whether it's, I feel like I'm losing power, I feel embarrassed, I feel like I'm losing control. There's so many messages that we get as we're growing up that our kids can trigger feelings, right? I have this example. When my daughter was 2, she used to say no all the time. What 2-year-old doesn't? It's the power of a toddler. They own us, right? And my mom came to visit. My mom was really bothered by this. And she was like, you let her say no all the time. Well, I have to remember, right? Kids are to be seen and not heard. Kids are to follow instruction from adults and respect their elders, never to be defiant. And in my head, I'm like, she has to learn how to say no to me so that she can say no when she's with her friends when she's a teenager. If she doesn't learn that with me, she's not going to do it later. But that feeling of like, I don't have control over my kid's going to be defiant. My mom was very much holding that. Like, what is that feeling? So we want to look at what is the feeling we feel and when did we feel that before? Because rarely when we're triggered is it about the interaction immediately at hand. It's about other stuff that's happened. And the last question is, what age did I experience these hard things in my childhood? I grew up in a pretty chaotic home. When I was 8, all sorts of stuff went down. When I was 15, all sorts of stuff went down. For a long time while I'm working through this business, I had to realize 8-year-olds were hard for me to work with and 15-year-olds were hard for me to work with. And that's because it pressed on my own wounds. Tip 5 talks about how to address your own wounds. But I want to talk like you have to know what's your story, what's your journey, what happened to you. We know that book, but what happened to you that you're bringing into this relationship with this other person that could be so easily triggered? So I'll pause for a minute.
And a pause gives me a chance to jump in here real quick with a couple of things. One, I had a comment here from Angela in Wisconsin. Angela says, "Hi, from Wisconsin. I was a teacher. Last year, I pulled my child from public school, fifth grade. I did the same at fifth grade is when we actually pulled my son to homeschool him. And now we do virtual school at home. I could no longer watch my child be dysregulated all day. We're in a better place now. We can meet the basic needs so much easier at home. We can work on social skills. We can modify assignments. And certainly that experience is one that we find a lot of the families that are part of our community have gone through, where there's a point where they just realize that they
100%.
can't. And, a lot of people pull out and homeschool. And unfortunately, there's some other issues there in terms of not everybody has that ability. We've got to work to fix these systems because, not everyone has the ability to say, okay, well, I'm going to homeschool. I mean, they might be working multiple jobs to, keep food on the table. It's not always an option. Want to hit on a couple more comments here. Chantel said, yes, when my daughter has a day of a lot of yelling, I'm triggered. Way too much yelling in my childhood, and I recognize this is why. How to rid myself of this trigger is the question. And I think that's going to be something we get to with tip 5, I think. So is that right? Tip 5 is going to help maybe a
Yes.
little?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I haven't even seen tip 5, but that's what it sounded like. So I'm looking forward to that. And then Michelle said, what about the psychology of segregation?
So I'm guessing that's in like response to homeschooling a kid, kind of pulling them out of school. And what I talk about, and I'm guessing we're probably on similar pages, Guy, is that co-regulation and managing your stress response is so critical. And once that gets on board and we've created safety, they can go back into different settings. But if that setting isn't safe for a kid and they're dysregulated, they're living in this fight, flight, freeze, fawn state all the time, it's more important to pull them out and create safety than to keep them in and get the benefits of what wouldn't be segregation, right? When we segregate kids, especially if it's pulling them out to homeschool, it's about safety and it's about nervous system. And when kids are living in these stressed out states in environments where they don't feel safe, they're not getting the benefit of being there anyway, because they're always on guard and they can't build relationships that feel safe and connected. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's really well said. I mean, we didn't take lightly to doing homeschooling, but at the time it was I think critical for where my son was. But my hope is, let's change systems. I mean, my hope is let's have kids in inclusive environments. Let's not have kids even in segregated classrooms. We want to work towards, getting our kids included with their peers. And, I think that everybody benefits from that. I mean, there've been a lot of research around that, not just kids with disabilities, but neurotypical kids as well are benefiting from that. Let's see. And Michelle just kind of clarified, I mean, segregation in schools, the danger of being separated from the pack. And I think you hit on that already a little bit, Stacy, is that anytime we're separating people, there's a cost to that. And certainly what we want to do is build systems that are inclusive, that are tuned into the needs of individual students within the classroom. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I also think that we miss opportunities where students can help co-regulate other students, or we can create environments of co-regulation. And that's one of the reasons this work has really changed my life, is that when we see that we have 30 kids or 25 kids in a classroom with varying stress response systems, and we start to talk about, hey, some of us are going to show up, we're going to have a bad day. How are we as a family, as a team in this classroom going to approach that? How are we going to keep people safe? Not everybody has the same needs on the same day at the same time. My son had this amazing teacher in third grade who they had 2 tea stools in their classroom. And those are the school tools you can rock back and forth on, flexible seating options. And each kid got assigned a tea stool for a week. And then the next week, another kid got it. But during that week, you could gift the tea stool to another kid if they needed it more. And by the end of the school year, the same kid had the tea stool every week. And I said to my son, do you think that's fair? And my son said, Mom, why do adults think everything needs to be fair? If he's not regulated, we're not learning. He needs that more than we need it. And so that was a whole lesson for me in equitable versus equal. right?
Mhm.
And so I think when we segregate kids in schools, we're not always looking at how is the system able to help co-regulate kids when we teach these skills. You'll see kindergarten kids co-regulating each other.
Right.
You'll see third, fourth, fifth grade, middle school kids going, they're having a bad day. They need to go to the counselor, or they need this, or they need that. And so normalizing that experience of co-regulation is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I was lecturing, but important.
All right. Well, let me let you get on with the next tip here.
Yeah, I want to just say, Michelle, you have a great question about fire drills and bells. I think when we talk about sensory system stuff and when we start to normalize what activates kids, these are the kinds of things that are pretty simple fixes. When we know there's going to be a fire drill and we have a kid that's going to be set off by that, hopefully we can partner and collaborate to figure out what's the answer. Can we give that kid noise canceling earphones before it happens? Can that kid have an appointment to go to that day? What does that look like so that we can create an environment that feels safe for those kids and they don't escalate? But we got to talk about sensory system first. So I just saw that was important because you're talking about triggers. Okay. Tip number 4, put money in the bank. So what does that mean? This talks about relational money. Every interaction that we have with the people in our lives either puts money in or takes money out. And we use this concept all the time in our daily life here at my house. Are we putting money in or are we taking money out? If we set that boundary and that limit, do we have enough money in the bank that when we set a boundary and there's a response, it's going to cash some of that money out? How much do we have in there? So a lot of times, especially when I go into schools, kids are having really big behaviors. And a lot of time that's because they don't have any money in the bank with the adults that are in their life. We see that an adult might be correcting behavior all the time, or they might be prompting, or they might be, just like picking on this certain type of behavior that's escalating, but we don't have any connection and relationship. And it's so important to look at how much money is in the bank and what are we doing that cashes money out of the bank. I think that each kid has ways that you can put money in the bank big time, right? A lot of our most dysregulated kids want attention, and we'll say kids are seeking attention. What I say is kids who seek attention need connection. And connection is what's putting money in that bank. And so if you're in a space where it's like, oh my gosh, every interaction with this kid is cashing out, cashing out, cashing out, cashing out, you've got to flip that and think, how do I put money more in that bank? When I was going through my own divorce with my children, I knew that was going to take a huge lot out of my bank. So I had to start really intentionally finding ways to connect. And I had to start figuring out, where am I going to press on the boundaries? Where am I going to hold limits? Because there might be a big cash out and I don't want to do that. When I got remarried and I brought someone into my life, we use that term. We got to put money in the bank. We got to build relationship. And it's so critical to do that. In education systems, oftentimes kids become most dysregulated when they're unsupervised, and when they're at a place that's unstructured, and when there's way too many kids versus adult ratio. And so when you want to put money in the bank with dysregulated kids, you look at those 3 areas. Let's teach kids how to be in unstructured places by making the group smaller and giving them structured things to do. Let's put them in places where you can get some one-on-one connection that puts money in their bank so that they don't feel that dysregulation. I also like to add in the piece for adult relationships. When you're engaged in adult relationships, you want to make sure the money in the bank is reciprocal. So when you're hanging out with your friends, you want to have friends that are going to check on you as much as you check on them. When you are evaluating your relationships with your own family carries a pretty weighted word. And when we're evaluating relationships with our family as adults, we want to find out, is that reciprocal? Do they put money in the bank or do they zap us? Because we might need more money in the bank and emotional capacity with kids. Okay, that's all I'll say for that moment. I'm looking to see what else we got over here.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple more comments here. I think as we're talking about this, Michelle had commented back, absolutely, it's all in the IP. And Jennifer had mentioned recess. We also had Angela who said, that she had to pull
Yeah.
hers from son from school because school was not a safe place. Actively working on co-regulation with my child now, but we're so isolated. Our local homeschool community is active. Homeschool tennis, outdoor science, hiking, play dates, etc. Teacher in the same school, I felt a huge amount of guilt leaving behind my students who needed me. But I was on an island talking about being proactive, co-regulation,
Yep.
trauma-informed, eliminating prize boxes, etc. Angela, for whatever it's worth, and I think you probably are getting that through this presentation already. You are not alone on your island. I'm on your island with you. Stacy's on your island. We've got a lot of people here on the island with you, and our hope is to take over the mainland at some point. Maybe a bad analogy, but we've got to work to change systems that are in need of an update. I mean, we are lagging decades behind in a lot of our schools in terms of what's being done. I mean, concepts like co-regulation, and it's hard, Angela, when you're on the forefront of that. Sometimes there's a lot of resistance to change, but no, you are not alone. Hopefully you're getting that from Stacey's presentation today as well.
Yeah. And what I would say to you, Angela, I really do use the word pioneer. And I'm from the Western states, Wyoming native, lived in Montana, live in Colorado. If you've never been out here, pioneer is like, it's desolate. You could drive for hours without seeing another human. You can feel so alone. And it takes an extreme amount of like, I know this to be true and I'm going to stay the course. And never feel bad for choosing your own kids. When you have to decide, I'm going to stay in this place where my kid's not getting what they need and I know they're to be better, or I'm going to leave behind these students I love and adore to meet my own children's needs, your kids win. That's just how it has to be. And so just know that you're a pioneer. There's a group of us that are pioneering with us. We're just so far away. We can't always see each other, but we're there. So you're not alone.
Great. And Shireen said, love the money in the bank concept. Yes, it's all about the relationship and connection. That's what really matters.
Cool. All right.
Number 5. We've been waiting for number 5 here.
Okay. Number 5. I know I triggered you all about triggers and now we're on the answer. Okay. So I just think it's so critically important for adults to really own your journey. We have these individual stories of things that have happened in our past, experiences that we've occurred that cause us pain. And naturally, we want to steer clear of painful stories. We don't want to talk about the hard things that happened to us. We don't want to process the events that occurred. So I often say, I can't walk into this room, this virtual room, and leave every piece of Stacy's experiences behind. I can't do that. Little Stacy's there, middle school Stacy's there, high school, college, first day, like all of the parts of myself are there. And my story is messy. And when we really look at pain equals opportunity, then we have an opportunity to grow, right? We have an opportunity to heal. And so when you're going through those triggering events, when you're looking at like, who does this kid remind me of? I have this story I often tell. I had this woman who came into my office and she said, Stacy, I think my 7-year-old's going to kill me. And I'm like, whoa, most 7-year-olds are not that violent. And when I had her go through those questions and I said, when did you feel this way before? When we sink into your body and we talk about how we feel, she said, I felt the same way when I was perpetrated and sexually assaulted in college. So do I have a mom and a 7-year-old? Or do I have a co-ed who was sexually assaulted? She has to process that event before she can engage in being a mom in a pure way with all that other junk behind her. And so how do we do that? I get this question all the time. We honor our story. We didn't ask for our growing up experiences. We didn't ask for the pain that maybe we got. We didn't ask for someone to hurt us or for us to hurt someone else. So these things just happen. So we have to honor it. We have to accept that it's happening, and then we have to feel it. Nobody likes feeling it. I'm a therapist. Every day I have an appointment with my own therapist. I'm like, I'm sick. My kids are sick. I could cancel. What's my reason? Because nobody really loves feeling their feelings. And we're growing up in a society where all this messaging is like feelings are bad, push it away, depending on where you grow up and the messaging you had growing up. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, be strong, be resilient. Listen, I'm in the Army. You all have paid, not all of you overseas, but you Americans have paid billions of dollars for our resiliency program to prevent suicide. The reason it doesn't work in the most effective way is because trauma and resiliency are two sides to the same coin. If we never talk about the trauma, we can't get to resiliency. And just like in kids, if we only talk about the trauma, we never talk about resiliency, we're not looking at the other side of the coin. So we have to feel, we have to see where these things feel in our body. How do we release them? And then how do we let go? So I encourage you all to find a good counselor or therapist, get online, find somebody you can talk to, right? We know all The Body Keeps the Score is such an important book for this part of this presentation. We know EMDR, neurofeedback, trauma-informed yoga, all of that stuff releases the stories that we're carrying. And if we don't release that, then it becomes these generational things that we're passing on. So I think it's just so important to spend time talking about ourselves and our own journey and not just the kids we love and care about. I had this experience the other day. I broke my toe. It was a bad deal. I dropped a piece of wood on my toe. And I was like screaming from upstairs to downstairs, like, come help me, come help me. And at one point I texted my kids, like, I need help. And I could hear them downstairs, like, you go help her. It's your turn. No, you go help her. It's your turn. They finally get up and like my toe's black and blue. I can't walk. And they're like, Mom, you didn't yell. Well, I grew up in a family of yelling and I was very committed to not yelling. And I haven't yelled for a very long time. And they were like, no, this is the time you yell. Like, this is how it works, Mom. And I was like, oh, okay. That's another part of my story. You yell for help when you need help. But it doesn't mean I have to just shut down yelling altogether because I grew up in a family of yellers. So we need to own our part of our story. And then we need to model how to heal from that part of the story. So that's my last tip, Guy.
That's fantastic. And these tips, and I know you said you had more, and I think we'll have to talk about getting you back again to share more of these tips, and also sharing about the electronics addiction. But these are fantastic tips, and I think very much at the heart of a lot of what we're talking about here. But I think as you kind of wrapped up with tip number 5, it all comes back together, right? It's kind of taking care of ourselves, putting our own oxygen mask on before we, put the oxygen mask on others. I love what you're doing and what you're talking about. I want to invite people that are watching us live. If you have questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. Just go over a couple things real quick. Linda, who's one of our friends in New Zealand, they've been doing a lot of great work out there. In fact, they've done some work with Bruce Perry and the neurosequential model, which of course Perry talks about the indigenous populations in New Zealand as well. A lot of fantastic work happening there. I keep telling Linda that she needs to invite us out to New Zealand to give a talk, but I haven't made it out there yet. And Jennifer was very excited, kind of agreeing with us and talking about play for kids and adults. This is fantastic information, and you come from it with such a interesting background. And I think owning our own kind of background and experiences, this is about I think making at least I think it's making positive change for our kids and future generations. But again, it starts with us. And I love the title of Bruce Perry's book, of course. What happened to you. Kind of I think a really valuable reframing, because growing up myself in the 70s and 80s, I think there was a lot more of kind of the what's wrong with you approach. A lot more of really punitive approaches. You talked about kids being there. We have a lot of progress to make when it comes to kids. And to me, it's all these things that happen. The fact that we have corporal punishment that's allowed in schools in 19 states, allowed in homes, across the country. There's a lot of places where, we really need to make progress. But I think your message comes home with the starting with us, I think, part, which is so critical.
Yeah. Well, I just think there's so much about understanding our own story, and those of us who are raising children success, like in a successful school, a school that's trauma informed, restorative practices, social emotional learning. Those are few and far between, by the way. But those of us who have kids in those schools are seeing that our kids are valuing this experience. They're very much growing from these experiences. And what I'm seeing often is that our kids are outgrowing us in some ways emotionally,
Mm-hmm,
and
hmm.
they're teaching us things. And when the kids become our teachers, that's such a lesson and value in, like, we need to own what happened to us, and we need to own what our story is and what kind of environment happened.
Hmm.
And I'm not blaming about what
Right,
happened. We didn't know
right,
all those things,
right,
right? But
right,
much like I started this journey because I was restraining a kid 6 to 8
right,
hours a day,
right,
and now I'm in a place where I'm like, I would never do that
right.
because I have all these other tools in my toolbox that can help me de-escalate, work through things, understand co-regulation, understand
Hmm.
the importance of dosing regulation throughout the day. Like, those are critical pieces that we just didn't know, and now we know.
Hmm. 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 Jennifer just jumped in here and said, if there was one point to make to a leader in a school district regarding this info about the nervous system and behaviors issues, what would it be? So, what is your big take home message that you would want people to share with others?
Yeah, so I really talk about, like, the cortex being adults' worst enemy. And when I speak to schools, that lands in a way that most of the other points I talk about don't always land. And so when we really get into brain development and we really discuss where kids are in their development, why they can't reason, why they can't reflect, all those things, like, the adults are like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. This makes so much sense. And they're like, yes, it makes sense because we're asking kids to do things they aren't capable of doing. And one of the things I often say to adults is, like, when you say to a kid, why did you do that? What do kids say? I don't know. And then what happens? The adults go, well, of course, you've done that 100 times. I don't know. No, really, we are going to talk about this until you figure out why you are doing that. Why is a cortex question. If we keep cortexing kids, we're never going to treat kids the way they deserve to be treated and meet them at their developmental level. And
Hmm.
so when I'm trying to like, when I'm speaking to school boards, when I'm speaking to administrators, when I'm trying to talk to them about these things, I say, when we start to understand brain development, we use less cortexing, we see behavior problems decrease tremendously,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
off the charts. And what do administrators want? They want their teachers teaching, they want kids learning, and they want less behaviors to deal with. And the way to do that is understanding the brain-based science behind all this stuff.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Great point. And of course, Jennifer, I would also say that, all five of these tips are probably great things to share, but, appreciate you making that. I remember when my son was pretty young, probably 6 or 7 years old, asking that question you mentioned, why'd you do this? And my son had an answer that now I look at as so far more insightful than it probably should have been at 6 years old. But he would say, I don't know. My brain made me do it.
Oh, I
And
love it.
and there's a lot of insight there, you know? I
Mhm.
think that, again, as we're developing, I mean, the whole, kind of idea around brain development is, of course, it happens from bottom to top and back to front. The last part to fully develop is the prefrontal cortex, our
Yep.
kind of rational decision-making brain. Yet we have this expectation that the kids are, fully, able to control and, think of things that, they're just not capable. They're not, developmentally at the
Yep.
same stage that we often, kind of think that they are. A couple more things here. Oh, great. I see you brought up your contact information. I was going to ask you about that.
Fine.
Katie says, how can we help a child who's self-injuring themselves or others in a crisis moment? Is there a resource that I can go to for advice, ideas, and tools? Uh, any ideas on that, Stacy?
Yeah, this one's tricky, but oftentimes I say, look at the sensory system. So offer a tool that engages a sensory system that's another option besides self-injuring. Whether, I mean, I have a kiddo that was self-injuring for a very long time and gave her a permanent marker and she started drawing all over her legs. And some parents are like, I would never do that. Well, would you rather have your kid drawing all over her legs, making these beautiful canvases with permanent marker, or cutting? And so you want to start looking at what are the ways that we can look at the sensory system and engaging that. The other question is start talking about stress. What is so stressful in this kiddo's life that is causing them to want to harm, that is causing them? So dissociation is a real thing. That's a whole nother topic also. When we are so stressed out that we're checked out, and we can engage in self-harm or self-injurious behaviors, that tells us that that stress system is extremely activated. And we want to look at what are the ways we're going to release that rubber band for this kid. That's sort of a broad strokes answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will mention also, just to add to the conversation, you mentioned kind of in crisis, and there are actually, crisis management programs that can address things like self-injury that are not restraint and seclusion based. I think about things like Ukeru, which is spelled Ukeru. They use specialized pads that can help prevent self-injurious behaviors. So, I mean, there are other things kind of that can be done, but the key with all of this is really what we want to do is do what we can to avoid an escalation that might turn into a crisis. So, how can we get upstream? And I think that what you're talking about, Stacy, is exactly that. We get upstream through relationship, we get upstream through co-regulation, and going back to kind of the Bruce Perry model, it's regulate, relate, reason, right?
Yep.
We've got to start at that lower level, and it's the mint, it's the let's tap into their, kids beginning to escalate. Let's tap into their sensory system. Let's find a way that we can avoid this from happening. That's the ideal, right? The ideal is let's get to a point where kids feel safe and well regulated. Let's see what else we have here in our chat. Okay. And Shireen said occupational therapists can also help with sensory regulation. Great point.
I think they're super underutilized in schools. I think occupational therapists are like magic puppets, and they're puppeteers, and they can help us with so many things, and they're just not as valued as they should be. So please use your OTs.
Yeah, I actually agree with you quite a bit. And I remember having a conversation, I think it was with Greg Santucci about this, but, I think in a lot of schools, the OTs are not utilized to their full potential. I mean, it's often about like grasping pencils and augmented, communication, devices and things like that. When in fact, I think about things like, when schools begin to have concerns around behavior and they do a functional behavioral assessment, it's like there's a step before that for an OT. Like, let's do an environmental assessment. Let's figure out like what's getting in the kid's way. The examples that you provided earlier were right in that vein. It's like before we start putting the problem on the kid, let's understand them and their environment. Let's understand why they're having a hard time. But so often that tendency is to go straight to, straight to the kid. And then often what comes out of that process is a reward and consequence driven behavioral plan. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you for the expression. If I captured that as a still frame, we could make a meme on that. but I mean, it really failed the kid. I mean, it's not understanding the needs.
Well, and we talk a lot like rewarding consequences, behavior charts, reward, like all those things. Those are cortex interventions.
Yep.
And they don't work with kids who have these huge behavior problems. What I ask teachers to do when they're doing a functional behavioral assessment is look at how long kids stay regulated in between behaviors, because that's actually going to tell you way more than the behavior. Right. And check marking behavior. No, how long are they staying regulated between the behavior? Because that's telling us what this stress response system is doing. Right. And those are such critical questions.
Yeah, I think. Well, and very often in a lot of places, I mean, when people look at behavior, they look at the antecedent and they only look at the thing that happened immediately before. They're not understanding, was there past trauma? Where's this trigger that's coming back as a reaction and not a memory? Where are things that are happening that might have influenced this that are beyond the thing that happened 30 seconds ago? And so I think oftentimes there's such a misunderstanding around, I think a lot of kids are misunderstood, and that leads to restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, kids becoming disengaged, kids ending up down the school to prison pipeline. We need to do better. And I'm with you. I'd love to see more robust roles for a lot of our occupational therapists. They have so much to bring into these conversations, but often the focus is strictly on behavior and is missing the boat for a lot of kids.
I see Michelle had a question for us about, is there a point of no return for students in districts? I think districts are driven by administrators, and I think administrators are chosen by the community and your board members. And I think everyone has a role in making your environments and your communities trauma informed. And so when I've worked in districts that have top-down support, right? They have board members on board, superintendent on board, principals, administrators on board, and those school districts get gripped in this sort of environment. I have a principal I work with right now. She hires no one who does behavior charts. And that has been a little bit of a controversy, but I'll tell you what, they're on board. That school is a very regulated community, and they're doing all sorts of they have lower behavior problems, less out of school suspension, all those kind of things, right? And so I do not rob people of hope. So I always believe that there's hope for every school district and every student. And I think it just takes a little bit longer for some people to get on board and buy in, because these systems are not created to do these kind of things. So it's a whole flip of the system.
Absolutely. Just get a couple more comments here, and then we'll wrap up. Angela said, when I was teaching, I had a few personal mantras. What does a child do well, and focus on that first instead of the behavior? If the child was my child, how would I want the teacher to treat them? Both of these lead me down the path of co-regulation, even if I did not know that term at the time. That's fantastic, Angela. Thanks for sharing. And also, Angela, I'll mention to you and mention to all of our educators that are watching. We love here at the Alliance to share, things that people have learned in their journeys. If you're a teacher or even a previous teacher and want to share some of your experiences, reach out and contact me. I'm always looking to, because what we want to do is we want to take the knowledge that you have. And, even if you've had to leave the profession, as you mentioned, there's some real value to that. So feel free to reach out to us. Michelle had asked, could I repeat what the environmental assessment was called? Well, I wish I could. Unfortunately, what I was talking about, Michelle, was really kind of more ideally that we should be doing environmental assessments. We should, prior to and this is my feeling here. And Stacy, you can tell me if I'm crazy, but I think before we ever get to an assessment like a functional behavioral assessment, let's have an OT come in. Let's have an OT come in and kind of understand the environment, do an environmental assessment, talk to the child, do much of the things that you said. I mean, let's sit down with a kid in the room and see what they're noticing. I think there's a lot to be learned about, a child in the environment. And I think OTs are really, as you said, underutilized. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah. And I just believe you could do a sensory inventory very much. I have a daughter who really struggles with quiet rooms. So we've built it in that she can listen to music while she's taking a test. Right. And what the other thing I think is really interesting is when you do trainings in your district, when you talk to educators, when you talk to teachers about this kind of stuff, start tapping into their own sensory system. Ask them, how many of you brought something to drink? How many of you were doodling? How many of you, when you were writing your papers, listened to music? How many of you needed complete silence? Which one of you are right? And then you start to go, oh, we all have these different ways of learning. We all and these are the students in our classroom, and we're telling them there's only one way to learn, and we're finding out that's not true.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I see Jennifer said, change the environment, not the kid. It reminds me of, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, kind of this idea that like if a flower is not thriving, we don't try to change a flower. We move it to a different environment. We find out what it needs. We don't just say, okay, well, it's the flower's fault. The kids are flowers. We need to figure out what we need to do to support them. What do they need to thrive and survive? Not expect them to change to the system. We need to change and individualize for them. Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've so enjoyed the opportunity to not only meet you initially, but this has been fantastic today. And I know I've joked about it, but be assured I'll be sending you a follow up at some point and saying, hey, you want to do another one of these? It was a lot of fun. Where you do training and other things as well. I mean, what other kinds of things might you do that people that are watching might be interested in?
Yeah, so on my slide that said next steps, there's a link to my website. You can get a hold of me anytime there. I have an online parenting class that it's about 2.5 hours that people can access. I have an online 6-hour trauma-informed teacher course. I've had about 800 teachers go through it. It's just good content, good information. Come in, I do a lot of trainings in schools. Currently, I run a support group for administrators and a support group for teachers. I do a lot of clinical work and coaching with people who might want to dig deeper into their own story and their own like therapy kind of stuff. So I wear a lot of different hats. I've got a lot of different resources. I always tell people I'm in your life now, so use me as a resource as you'd like to. You can email me, stacy@gobu.org, and ask me the questions you have. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction or serve you in some way. My goal is to serve as many people as I can while I'm on this planet, because this work is so important. And I've also worked with districts for entire years where they bring me in for a couple of years at the beginning, and then we do a monthly check-in and monthly training throughout the year. It just really depends on what the needs of the district are and the needs of schools and parents, right? If you're a parent and you're wondering if you're all alone, reach out to me and I'll support you in that. So I appreciate this opportunity, Guy. I love that we got to meet. I think we'll be seeing each other again here shortly, hopefully in February.
Are you going to be in Houston?
I will for just a couple days. I can't go for the whole event, but I hope I at least get to say hi to people. And then,
yeah, that's great. So in Houston is the Attachment and Trauma Network conference, creating trauma sensitive schools, their 6th annual conference. So you'll be speaking there?
Yes, I'm doing an academy day the day before the event. So
okay.
I said,
great.
Listen, I got a lot to say. If you're going to have me there, I need 3 hours. 1 hour is never enough.
I'm excited to hear that. I'm excited to hear that. Well, hang around with me for a second. I'm just going to queue up our next show and then we can wrap up here. But again, thank you so much for joining us today and being part of the program. I look forward to continuing to collaborate with you. I'm just going to mention to everybody else, and if you'll hang around for 1 second, we'll wrap up the show. That again, in 2 weeks, we've got another live event coming up. We've got Jody Place, who is going to be doing a presentation on discipline for learning, not shaming. Jody's another one of these amazing people that I've met through this work, and someone else who will be joining us there in Houston as well, as I recall. So another great program coming up in 2 weeks. I want to thank everybody for being part of our program here today. I'm going to wrap it up. Stacy, hang around because we'll get off the air, and I just want to give you one more thank you. But thank you, everybody, for being part of the program, and we will see you again soon. We actually have a special event next week talking about the Attachment Trauma Network. So I believe that's going to be on Thursday around 2, if I'm not mistaken. And in 2 weeks, we'll have our next regularly scheduled event. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.